Well, evening, everyone. How you doing today? Good. How many of you enjoyed sunshine this morning or this afternoon? It's really good that summer's finally arrived, hey? I've been waiting for it. It's finally here. Hey, I've got a confession to make. I'm not really all that into reality TV, but to be honest, there has been a show that's kind of captivated my attention over the last couple of years, and it's called The Voice. Anybody heard of it? Any Voice binge watchers out there? Okay, you're my people. Right on. What's cool about this reality TV show, because I watch them all, I don't, but what's different about it is the way they've gone around kind of setting up the environment around this contest. See, it's a contest where vocal performers, they come on stage, they do their shtick, they have these judges choose or critique them or choose them to be on their teams, and they're competing for a chance at a recording contract. But what's different about this show from other shows that I've seen of that nature, musical performers, is the way they've set up the environment. They perform in front of a live studio audience, but as they're on stage, the vocal performers, the people can see them, but the judges can't. They've got their backs turned to them. All they can do is hear, and they respond to what they hear. If they're inspired, if they're moved, if they're curious about and they want to know more, they've got to press their button, and then their chair turns around, and that's the moment where they see what they've been hearing. It made me think this week, how many times do I analyze what I do or what I don't do and the voices behind those decisions? The voices that bombard me, the voices that spark curiosity, that cause me to question, do I analyze where they're coming from, if they're healthy, if they're from God, or if they're from something else? I think there's three primary voices at play in our world today. Lots of different venues make access of them, the people around us, news, media, our workplace, circumstances. But the three predominant messages that come across is the voice of fear, the voice of pride, and the voice of hope. And only one of those three is rooted in the truth of Jesus. This evening, what we're going to do is we're going to actually take a little bit of a journey together in the book of Judges. So if you've got a Bible with you, I want you to begin turning to the book of Judges. We're going to land in chapter 6. If you don't have a Bible with you, you can look in the pew rack in front of you, or in a few moments it'll be on screen as well, or you can pull out your device and app your way there. But we're going to go into the book of Judges. Before we read the text, though, what I'm going to do in the next kind of 60 seconds or so is I'm going to give you an overview of where we are in the unfolding story of God called the Bible. Because sometimes when we dive into the middle of something, it feels like when you go to somebody's house for a movie and they've invited you over to watch, but they've started watching before you get there, and you ask them to start the movie over and they refuse. So then you're trying to play catch up and like, who are these characters? What's happening here? So we're going to do that quickly in kind of 60 seconds. The big things that are good for us to be aware of from the beginning to where we pick things up here in the book of Judges. God created everything. That's where we start. He created everything. All of creation, humankind, animals, plants, trees, water, everything. He created all of it. And it was good. And he had great relationship with human beings. And he chose a community of human beings to set aside, and he blessed them to be a blessing to the rest of humankind in the world. And he called this community the Israelites. And he gave them a bunch of different promises, one of which was that they were going to have a land, a space of their own to call theirs, their home, their homeland. And so the majority of the Old Testament follows their journey of trying to take possession of what God promised them, this promised land. It's ups and downs, ebbs and flows. And by the time we get to the book of Judges, what we've discovered is like this group of people is not unlike you and I. They're very similar. They have highs, they have lows. They have moments where they get it right, moments where they get it wrong. When we get to Judges, what's cool about this book is this is the moment that they've actually stepped into the land that God first promised their forefathers, their patriarchs. They're in that space, but as they're in that space, they didn't do everything that God asked them to do when they took possession of the land. They were only partially obedient. And when you're partially obedient, you're still disobedient. And so they face a number of different challenges and calamities, and they have trouble with their neighbors. Sidebar, if you've got trouble with your neighbors, try inviting them over for dinner. Might help. They've got trouble with their neighbors. They're tormented. They're confused. They're frustrated. They've got moments where like, hey, we're right in where God has led us, and now we're straying away from it. And in these moments when they are down and they're desperate, they call out to God, and God, being the loving God that he is, decides to rescue them. And he raises up temporary leaders called judges to help rescue them from the space that they're in, the challenges that they're facing in the moment. So tonight, as we dig into the story of one of these judges, it's a little bit of backstory to help you understand what's going on. If you read further in the book of Judges, what you're going to discover is it contains a 400-year period of history for the nation of Israel. And the pattern of this book is one of up and down and up and down and up and down. But by the end of Judges, you'll discover that, man, when we are left to our own vices as human beings, we can really, really create chaos for ourselves. In the absence of doing life the way God intended it to be lived, chaos runs supreme and rampant. It's really important that we can study from these stories and be mentored and learn from some of the people who lived before us so that we can, in theory, make better decisions in our time frame and in our own stories. Having said all that, we're going to dig into Judges chapter 6. I'm going to start by reading the first 16 verses, starting with verse 1. The Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight. So the Lord handed them over to the Midianites for 7 years. The Midianites were so cruel that the Israelites made hiding places for themselves in the mountains, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, marauders from Midian, Amalek, and the people of the east would attack Israel, camping in the land and destroying crops as far as Gaza. They left the Israelites with nothing to eat, taking all the sheep, goats, cattle, and donkeys. These enemy hordes, coming with their livestock and tents, were as thick as locusts. They arrived on droves of camels, too numerous to count, and they stayed until the land was stripped bare. So Israel was reduced to starvation by the Midianites. Then the Israelites cried out to God for help. When they cried out to the Lord because of Midian, the Lord sent a prophet to the Israelites. He said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you out of slavery in Egypt. I rescued you from the Egyptians and from all who oppressed you. I drove out your enemies and gave you their land. I told you, I am the Lord your God. You must not worship the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you now live. But you have not listened to me." Then the angel of the Lord came and sat beneath the great tree of Ophrah, which belonged to Joash of the clan of Abiezer. Gideon, son of Joash, was threshing wheat at the bottom of a winepress to hide the grain from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "Mighty hero, the Lord is with you." "Sir," Gideon replied, "if the Lord is with us, why has this all happened to us? And where are all the miracles our ancestors told us about? Didn't they say, 'The Lord brought us out of Egypt'? But now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to the Midianites." Then the Lord turned to him and said, "Go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you." "But Lord," Gideon replied, "how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh. And I am the last and the least in my entire family." The Lord said to him, "I will be with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man." So the first time that we meet Gideon, I want you to take notice of where this conversation happens. Gideon is threshing wheat, not something abnormal for people who are gathering from the harvest in that time period. And threshing wheat is just a simple activity where you're separating the straw from the actually heads of grain. So you can grind up the grain, you can make flour, you can make bread, you can make all of those things. Now, typically, that took place in a threshing floor area. And a threshing floor area, as you see on screen in a few moments, is this big, wide open space, big circular thing. It's massive, it's huge. That's where that normally took place. But with Gideon, he's actually threshing grain in an entirely different space, in a wine press. And a wine press looked very, very different than a threshing floor. A wine press was like a cave that you had to take some steps to go down into, or a ladder. It was hidden. It was away from everything where people couldn't see what it looked like. They couldn't see what you were doing, and for a number of different reasons, it was set up that way. See, when you're fermenting things, I didn't know a lot about fermentation, so I had to study a little bit this week. When you're fermenting things, you don't want what you're producing to have access to sunlight or different elements at play, like dust, feces from animals or birds. You don't want anything tainting what you're developing. So you had this space that was more of a controlled environment where you could create this product. And Gideon is in this space for one reason: because he's afraid. See, the voice of fear always causes us to hide. The voice of fear always causes us to hide. He's not doing typically what he would do on a threshing floor. He's multi-purposing something that wasn't intended to thresh grain, to thresh wheat, so that he doesn't get found by the Midianites. It's really important to understand that that is the ultimate goal of the voice of fear: to cause us to hide in our relationships, in our workplace, in our connection with God. Fear always causes us to hide. If you look back at our origin story as human beings, you're going to find that God created everything. He created humans. It's a wonderful place in the Garden of Eden. He tells them to have fun, enjoy creation. And he asks one thing of them. He says, don't eat the fruit of this specific tree. He has face-to-face, unbroken relationship with his creation. They walk together. They talk together. But being as they're humans, they do what the majority of us would probably do. They do what they're not supposed to do. The very thing they were told not to, they chose to do. And they ate the fruit. And their eyes were opened. You know what their response was in that moment? They were filled with fear and guilt and shame. And so they hid. God comes looking for them, and he's calling out to them. You know what they're doing? They're hiding in the bushes. I don't know what made sense to them. Like, hey, if we hide there, the creator of the universe who created the bushes that we're hiding in, he's not going to see us. God knew exactly where they were. Fear always causes us to hide. If you've ever been around kids or parented kids, or you were a kid, maybe this has happened to you. A couple weeks ago, I came home from work and had this conversation as I came in the door. My wife said, Paxton and Layla, our two littlest ones who are 3. Daddy's home. What have you got to tell them? Do you know what happened? They came up to me and they had to tell me that they had been in trouble. They'd done something they shouldn't do. My son Paxton, when he's in trouble, you know what he does? He hides his eyes like this. Dad, can you hear me? And Layla looks away. And she won't look me in the eyes. They're hiding because they know that they've done something wrong. They're letting fear take over, and it's interfering with our relationship. Because, yeah, there's going to be a consequence for their mistake, but what's more important to me than anything is the relational connection that I have with my son and my daughter, that they know that they're loved despite what they've done wrong. So that when faced with a similar choice the next time, they might choose a different pathway forward. The voice of fear always causes us to hide. Where have you been hiding? Where have I been hiding? There's a verse in Scripture later on in the New Testament that says, perfect love casts out or drives out fear. Perfect love casts out or drives out fear. God is love, friends. And when we are connected with him, we do not need to be afraid. So let's stop hiding. We're going to continue looking at Gideon's story here, and we're going to zip down a few verses to verse 36 in chapter 6. It's a second conversation that he's having with God, and there's a second voice at play that's predominant in this interaction. Let's discover this together. Then Gideon said to God, if you're truly going to use me to rescue Israel as you promised, prove it to me in this way. I will put a wool fleece on the threshing floor tonight. If the fleece is wet with dew in the morning, but the ground is dry, then I will know that you are going to help me rescue Israel as you promised. And that is just what happened. When Gideon got up early the next morning, he squeezed the fleece and wrung out a whole bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to God, please, don't be angry with me, but let me make one more request. Let me use the fleece for one more test. This time, let the fleece remain dry, while the ground around it is wet with dew. So that night, God did as Gideon asked. The fleece was dry in the morning, but the ground was covered with dew. And this kind of interaction, this second conversation, it's really interesting to me because I think the predominant voice at play here in Gideon's heart and mind is actually the voice of pride. And the voice of pride, it has a root thing, like the voice of fear always causes us to hide. The voice of pride always causes us to forget. It causes us to forget, to become self-consumed, selfish, completely oblivion on what's happening around us, with the people around us, with God around us. We forget everything. This is verse 36. In verse 16, we just read that God said to him, hey, I'm going to be with you as you go destroy the Midianites. 20 verses later, he's like, I don't know if that was you speaking. I'm a little bit nervous. Could you reaffirm to me what it is that you originally said? Because I don't want to get it wrong. See, a lot of times, God speaks to us, and he says something to us, and because of our uncertainty, whether that's rooted in fear or pride, we ask him again for the same question. And we get the same answer, and then we want it confirmed a third time or a fourth time until we're ready to move. And God's just sitting there like, I don't know what else I can do. I've told you what I want from you. What I want from you is not delayed obedience, it's obedience. Let me put it to you like this. Let's pretend hypothetically that you all and myself were in one big car and we're driving from Red Deer all the way to Banff, Alberta. And we're having fun, so we're going a little bit faster than normal. Lo and behold, as we look in our rearview mirror, we've got a set of lights. You know the ones. A blue light and a red light, right? Most of you are going like, I've never seen those lights before in my life. I don't believe you, but those are from the police, okay? And what they're wanting us to do is pull over because they want to have a conversation. Usually involves a little piece of paper and a few numbers on it, right? Now imagine for a moment if we just looked in our rearview mirror and said, oh, that's nice, and kept driving. What do you think might have happened? It would probably escalate a little bit. Maybe he'd get closer, louder, start honking his horn. There's an expectation as he's indicating to us, hey, I'm right here, I need you to pull over. The culmination of that, if we just keep going and not noticing what's happening, is he or she is going to pull out ahead of us, going to speed up ahead of us, and going to cut us off so we have to slam on our brakes. And then that little piece of paper is going to have a lot higher numbers on it. I wonder if sometimes that's the way that God speaks to us as well. He says it once, he'll say it twice, but he's expecting us to act on what he said. And in this moment, I've got to believe that Gideon is listening more to pride, because pride is actually a masked form of insecurity. It needs to be fed all the time. Am I good at this? Am I good at this? Am I good at this? Did you see it? Am I good at this? Am I good at this? That's pride. You've got to feed it all the time. It's exhausting. And it's distracting. And it makes us forget what is happening around us and through us. In this part of Gideon's story, I've got to believe that it's the voice of pride that's speaking more clearly to him than any other voice. But God, in his infinite patience, in his kindness and his mercy, is willing to work with Gideon right where he's at. And his story doesn't end there. It continues in chapter 7. I'm going to read the next 7 verses for us. Starting in verse 1. So Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and his army got up early and went as far as the spring of Harod. The armies of Midian were camped north of them in the valley, near the hill of Moreh. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many warriors with you. If I let all of you fight the Midianites, the Israelites will boast to me that they saved themselves by their own strength. Therefore, tell the people, whoever is timid or afraid may leave this mountain and go home." So 22,000 of them went home, leaving only 10,000 who were willing to fight. But the Lord told Gideon, "There are still too many. Bring them down to the spring, and I will test them to determine who will go with you and who will not." When Gideon took his warriors down to the water, the Lord told him, "Divide the men into 2 groups. In one group, put all those who cup the water in their hands and lap it up with their tongues like dogs. In the other, put all those who kneel down and drink with their mouths in the stream." Only 300 of the men drank from their hands. All the others got down on their knees and drank with their mouths in the stream. The Lord told Gideon, "With these 300 men, I will rescue you and give you victory over the Midianites. Send all the others home." This interaction that Gideon has with God is very different than the other two, because it's all in the way that he responds. There's no questioning, there's no fear, there's no constant affirmation required or needed. There's just simple response and obedience. Think about this for a moment. If you've ever been bullied, I have. What you want in that moment when you're facing a bully, when you're going to stand up against them, is you want all the backup you can have. 32,000 of your closest friends, you're like, yeah, come on. We're going to change the tide on this one. He's got 32,000 people ready to fight. God says, hey, he's fully aware of what happens in our lives, our hearts, our minds. He's aware. He's aware of their propensity towards pride and fear. And so he says in verse 2, "If I let all of you fight the Midianites, the Israelites will boast to me that they saved themselves." He's fully aware of it. That's the crazy thing. When we're struggling with pride or fear, sometimes we think God doesn't get us, he doesn't understand. Jesus lived the human life. He experienced everything that you and I experience in terms of temptation, trial, error, frustration, all that stuff. He lived it. He breathed it. You can guarantee that he understands what we're going through, and he knows what's in our heart and our mind. And so he speaks directly to that in Gideon's life right here. He says, look, I'm gonna make it so that nobody can claim that they've done this on their own strength. They recognize that I am king of the universe and they are not. So he says, anybody who's afraid, tell them they can go home. And 20,000 leave. From 32,000, you lose 20,000. What's going through Gideon's mind? I don't know. I would be kind of like, oh, this is going to be interesting. Yeah. Can you guys fight with both hands? I don't know. But then God says, no, that's still too many. And so Gideon responds obediently, and he does the next thing. I'm going to whittle it down even further. There's two groups. The people that drink water like dogs, the people that drink water just putting their whole face in the stream. Can you imagine being Gideon in that moment as you're around that body of water, that stream, and you're like, okay, the majority of the men are drinking straight from the stream. Okay, I've still got a good-sized fighting force with you. And then God says to you, oh, and by the way, it's that smaller group over there. That's your guy. 300. From 32,000 down to 300. And Gideon doesn't question anything. He responds obediently, and he's like, okay. What's really cool is if you read the continuation of Gideon's story, you'll see how God used those 300 men to defeat an entire nation. It's unbelievable. See, when God's in control, when the voice of hope is leading us forward, the voice of hope causes us to persevere, no matter what the odds are stacked against us. It causes us to persevere, to stand firm, to be okay with the unknown, the uncertainty, because what we know is that hope, which is rooted in God, rooted in Jesus, will never fail. Ever. Ever. Hope will never fail. And what's really cool as we look at the life of Gideon, we see this unfolding, this progression. A man who is tormented by fear, tormented by pride, and now he's rooted in hope. And he knows that God's got this. I can't help but wonder if some of us can identify with what's happening in Gideon's story. Maybe we need to be reminded tonight that it's not the voice of fear or the voice of pride that's going to lead us to where we want to go. It's only the voice of hope. Many of you were offered a sticky note when you came in, and I watched some of you. Some of you were really creative in how you dodged it. Just like, woo. It was awesome. But this is the moment where we're going to need it. What we're going to do is we're actually going to create what I like to call the beginnings of a hope diary. See, it's a moments of uncertainty, of confusion, of chaos that we need something to hang on to be reminded of, so that we don't forget like the voice of pride, and we don't run away and hide like the voice of fear causes us to do. And so we're going to pull that out, and what I'm going to invite you to do is something that I invited myself to do even this morning, and I want you to answer this question. Where have I allowed fear to take control in my life? You don't have to write out that question, but just answer it. Where have I allowed fear to take control of my life? You know what it was for me? When I asked God that this morning, he said, it's with your kids. See, as a pastor, one of my greatest fears is that my kids would reject Jesus. That they would see something in me that doesn't line up with who Jesus is, and they'd be like, I don't want any part of that. See, I'm not a perfect person, despite being a pastor. Go figure. I'm not perfect. There's a lot of good, but there's a lot of bad, and there's a lot of ugly. And in my imperfection, there's a great fear that my kids would turn away from the Savior of the universe. And so there's things that we choose to do as parents, that I choose to do as a dad, to try and hide and protect and reinforce. But that's not rooted in hope, and God reminded me of that. Am I willing to give my kids to God? Because they're his kids too. Where have you allowed fear to take control of your life? Second question, where have I allowed pride to influence who I am and what I do? Where have I allowed pride to influence who I am and what I do? That constant affirmation. And again, I asked God that question. You know what he said to me? I need you to be present in the moment. See, I'm always on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And I'm always thinking about, I'm planning family vacation for 2021. That's what I'm doing right now. Some of you are like, you're crazy. Thank God you don't live with me. I'm a little bit weird that way. And God reminded me, it's not about you. It's not about what you think. And so as you plan, can you hold it loosely and allow me to dictate that? Can you be present in the moment so you don't miss what I'm doing right now? In you, in your kids, in your wife, in your neighbors, because I'm up to really cool stuff. And I need you to pay attention. Or maybe on your sticky, you can just write down where you need hope. Because what we're going to do in these next few moments is give you an opportunity to respond to what God is saying to you. I believe that God is a speaking God who wants a relationship with us. Some of you might be thinking, well, God's never spoken to me. Well, maybe you haven't taken the time to listen or haven't even taken the courage to start a conversation. Introduce yourself. Might seem silly, like, well, he's the creator of the universe. He made me. So, hi, God, it's me, Jason. How you doing today? Me? Start a conversation. If you don't know God, what greater opportunity than to have a relationship with him than now? Somebody who is completely focused on loving and pursuing you, to helping you experience the best version of life on the planet. So what we're going to do is, as we work on our startings of our hope diary, whether it's on these stickies or if you're a digital tech person and you want to do it on your phone, I'm going to just invite you during this last song of worship to come and do what I think Gideon did. Symbolically, we're going to just take our fear, our pride, we're going to give it over to Jesus, and we're going to say, hey, help us to be rooted in hope. Help us to see what we don't see. We're going to do that by just taking our sticky and putting it near or at the cross or on the cross. There's nothing magical about this activity. It's simply a declaration of going like, God, I need you. Don't know what else to do. Don't know what else to say. But I need you. And as I said, if you don't have a relationship with God, in a few moments you're going to see some men and women up here wearing different colored lanyards who would love to introduce you to who Jesus is. Let me pray. Father, I'm thankful. I'm thankful that we can be fully known by you. I'm thankful that your truth and your grace form this unbelievable tag team that invites us to experience hope in a real fresh and nourishing way. In these next few moments, Jesus, I'm just asking that you would speak. Because I got a sense that there's so many of us who've allowed fear to invade our lives in some way, shape, or form. Would you grant us the courage to tell fear that it no longer has a seat at our table? God, I'm aware that some of us are struggling with pride. We're people that we've masked our insecurity, and we need constant affirmation that we're good enough, or we're strong enough, or we're smart enough, or whatever. Would you give us the courage to tell pride not today? Father, would you illuminate to us the places where we have chosen to remain hidden from you, from our neighbors, from our close loved ones? Give us a courage to invite you into that unknown space so that you can have your way in us and through us. And pray this in your name. Amen.